Okay, so we're going to get into the false reap now. The false reap is basically a position where you are taking your leg over top of your partner's leg without having your other leg in behind, right? So like this would be classically a reap, or if I were inside of Stefan's legs and I'm bringing my leg across, this would be a reap. But the false reap is based on the premise that you wouldn't be able to normally do anything with this because the leg that I'm trying to attack is being blocked by my leg. So the purpose of the false reap is to create enough movement so that I can free this ankle, and obviously we'll be going through that in this section. The advantage of this position, first off, is, I mean, obviously it's getting more popular, so more people do recognize it for the threat that it is, but a lot of people won't. We're still early enough in the development where you do this to somebody and they're like, yeah, whatever, dude. You can't get my leg because it's stapled in behind your knee. One of the sort of classical jiu-jitsu or older school jiu-jitsu, or not even old, but like heel hook, leg lock related jiu-jitsu gambits is if somebody's trying to leg lock you, if you just keep your foot strong in their knee pit, they won't really be able to do anything to you, right? Like if Stefan is trying to leg drag me, as long as he maintains his right shin in my knee pit, there's nothing that I can do to him. Whereas if I was able to pummel inside, then all of a sudden I might have the potential for an attack. So we're taking advantage of the fact that some people aren't going to think this is a threat. And people who do know it's a threat, there'll be some typical things that they'll do to respond, and we'll have answers for that throughout this volume. But essentially, it's a combination of a little bit of lack of awareness that's going to help this work, but also just the fact that the threats that come from here are actually fairly easy for you to deal with because you can pretty much smash me. This is not a great frame, whereas because of this angle, the actual strength of the frame, because I'm, in this case, taking my left arm and putting it behind your knee, right? And there'll be various levels of depth that I'll be using this for, but this is a fairly robust frame. So now if you go to push down on it, you essentially can't smash me. So it's counterintuitive in that it's a more robust initial position, particularly against standing passers, but also when we're dealing with this from inside of the half guard or like reverse delariva guard, you can enter into leg entanglements by inverting without having to worry as much about being smashed in the process as if you went for a classic 411 or saddle entry from this position without the false reap. All right, we're going to get into the initial control scheme when we're gaining the false reap. One of the things we want to watch out for is we don't want to be too shallow. We want to get ourselves as close to elbow deep as we can, and we're either going to want to gable grip our hands or we're going to make a figure four style grip. This is provided that somebody is on their knees. We're going to be going over this against a standing passer, and obviously we're going to be going over this from a half guard knee cut type of situation. So the lower down my partner is, the more I want to be fairly deep like this. If we go into more of a standing position, you're usually going to start out wrist deep, and then as we throw the reap, we're going to want to get biceps deep. Obviously, at this point, I'm not going to be coming up and making a figure four grip. I'll still be on my elbow or shoulder, and I'll often have my hand underneath of my knee. So I'll be trying to pull you forward. And this is kind of the motion that we want. We'll be talking about Kazushi in the next video, but as long as I've got my forearm biceps behind your knee pit, or if we're down in a lower position where you're knee cutting, I've got a figure four grip like this, where you're no longer able to progress into your knee cut, right? What's going to enable the Kazushi is the fact that I'm preventing the forward movement of your ankle or knee while elevating you with my foot underneath your butt, which, as I said, we'll get into in the next video. Okay, so if we find ourselves in the false reap, the off-balancing mechanism, again, provided I get myself biceps deep, you can see I'm coming up on my elbow in this case. The off-balancing mechanism is going to be to push with my right foot up against Stefan's butt. In addition to that, if we can get you to rotate this way so that we're ass towards the camera. In addition to that, the ball of my left foot is lifting. So this is essentially the same mechanism as a butterfly sweep, right? It's just that I'm keeping your your leg trapped, whereas normally I'd be trying to lift your left hip. Now I'm trying to lift your right hip and bring it forward with my right foot. So the ball of my foot is digging into the ground. My right arm is pulling your knee towards my chest so that your knee can't really come forward anymore. And as I start to lift, this brings you forward. And that leads us into the rest of the movement, which is going to be the inversion, which we'll discuss in the next video. So the same thing is going to apply when my partner is in a knee cut or half guard position. I'm planting the ball of my foot and I'm kicking my partner forward, getting his weight over top of me. It's just in this case, I'm using more of the figure 4 biceps grip configuration versus this. If I don't have anything stopping Stefan's knee and I go to lift, this is unlikely to work. As I get this loaded up, I can bring him over my head because I'm stopping the forward motion of his knee. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the inversion. So I've got myself biceps deep. I've planted the ball of my foot. I've made sure to bring my partner forward. Now I'm on my left shoulder. I'm gonna start to roll over onto my right shoulder, and I'm still creating this bend in my partner's knee. So the inversion is fairly simple. We'll be coming out like this, and we'll talk about different finishes and leg configurations afterwards, but the essential part of the movement is pretty simple. As long as I keep my forearm tucked into the bend of his knee, I should be able to create enough of a bend here with my other arm that as I roll from one shoulder to the other, I end up in a configuration where I can attack the legs. So let's go through this from like an initial point of contact where I might be playing reverse delariva here. I start to come through, bring my partner forward, and that's really all that's gone on. Is this bend in the knee combined with the pressure here from my foot allows me to clear his leg. And now I'm in a, again, we'll talk about the different variations, but basically 411, backside 50-50, different attacks that I can immediately pursue that'll lead me to a heel hook. Okay, so from another angle here, again, like the reverse delariva is a pretty standard launching point for this. I'm getting myself biceps deep. I'm lacing the reaping leg in. I'm continuing to pull this knee towards my chest, and I'm placing the ball of my foot on the ground. As I start to elevate with my right foot against his far butt cheek, this sends him over, and I just roll now onto my right shoulder while pulling his knee in towards me. Corey being able to extend his leg, like straighten your leg up, that's the impediment to the reaping mechanism. So what I'm trying to focus on here is pushing up with my left knee pit while pulling down with my right forearm. And then this hand can just transfer the leg through, and I can start attacking various heel hooks from here. So one point we do actually want to maybe I'd say beat to death, but we haven't explicitly stated this. The process of going for a false reap involves a control scheme, an off-balancing, a Kazushi, and an inversion. It does not involve immediately inverting. So what I don't want to do is get here and do that. There's absolutely no point in attempting the inversion if my partner has their alignment. We beat this point to death throughout some of my other instructionals, which is the idea that if I don't first break or affect my opponent's alignment, if I don't deny them base, posture, or structure, not much I'm going to do is going to be effective against anybody that's decent at grappling. So when I'm entering this position, my first step is to take him off balance before I attempt it. And this should be your first step anytime you attack from the guard. If I attack you from my guard and I don't initiate a Kazushi, you're going to be in good alignment and I'm going to struggle to complete the attack against anyone good. So now that I've got this Kazushi going and his weight is somewhat in motion, or at the very least, it's over me in a way where I can still manipulate it. Now, as I continue to push and I roll onto my right shoulder, I can complete the attack. So without the initial Kazushi, the inversion is going to be a bit of a waste of time. At best. At worst, it's going to lead to you getting injured because as you roll up on your neck, somebody puts some pressure down on you and you're going to tweak yourself, which is completely not worth it. Be smart about this. Go through a proper procedure. Moves are nowhere near as important. And this is a move. False reap's a great move. It's a cool move. But the moves are nowhere near as important as the proper movement that keeps your body safe and renders your opponent's body vulnerable before you try to plug in the moves themselves. Okay, now let's just have a quick discussion on finishing. One of the choices that I'm going to have to make here, is when I move into the reaping part. So I invert and I come out to here. is, am I going to keep my right leg, like the reaping leg, am I going to keep this leg in place and basically go into a 411 style finish? Or am I going to transfer over into backside 50-50? So essentially, am I doing this and making sure that I can finish from here without him being able to block me? Or am I going to go ahead and do this? If I'm here and I want to make sure that he doesn't drive back into me. So this is the problem. This frame is not a great frame. As much as I can try to put my knee down here, if Corey builds back up, he can smash back into me. Whereas if I go to here and he goes to smash back into me, I don't really care. The backside 50-50 stomp 411 is really solid for finishing. However, if I end up here and I bring my left shin in behind his butt, there's a really good Canadian grappler named Kieran Kachuk that does a really good job with the false reap. And this is one of his, I don't know if it's innovations, but he certainly does a good job of emphasizing this point when he goes to the finish. You've got to frame with your left shin, or in this case, like the support leg shin. So if all I'm doing is this, and I'm trying to just triangle or like whatever, my leg, as Corey builds back up and pushes back into me, he can potentially smash me. But if we come back down, if I'm going to keep the 411 leg configuration, I want to turn as much as I can onto my right hip. So I've completed the inversion onto my right shoulder. I'm going to rotate onto my right hip, and then I'm going to expose the heel. So I will have gotten my, the reap part out of the way, right? Like I will have done this sort of thing. I'll drive my shin into the back of his knee. I'll be pushing his ankle so that I can get it a little bit closer to my rib cage. And then again, I can go with whatever grip configuration I want. I'll be extending him away, again, creating that traction, that extension and rotation against his leg. So it's totally fine to do this. Make sure you keep your other shin as a reinforcement. Otherwise, when we land out of the false reap and we come here, we simply transfer our leg across. All right, so it's up to you which one you prefer. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a comfort thing. If you're more backside 50-50 oriented, you would do this. If you're more 411 oriented, you would do the other one. But as long as we focus a little bit on getting that foot chambered down by our ribs when we catch, get, again, a fairly secure leg configuration, focus on pushing them away while maintaining a wedging force. Again, we'll talk about backside finishing in the 50-50 section in more detail, but we'll be grabbing the heel. We'll be using the reverse butterfly grip, or you can just use the standard grip here. This is plenty fine. He's not going to heel slip or toe slip at this point. I'm just going to be dragging his heel towards the mat as I push him away and hip in to create my finish. So one more time. I set up my false reap. I kick him forward. In this case, I'll keep the 411 and finish on the heel hook. So one of the first things that your training partners are going to figure out when you start playing with a false reap is that they can pummel this leg in behind this leg, and it essentially shuts down the position. I figured this out on my own. I've had students who figured it out without me ever teaching it to them. This is pretty much the standard response to the false reap. I know, independent of my coming up with this conclusion, I've seen super elite guys teach this as pretty much a go-to response, is this kind of pummel, and then they're going to try to essentially smash and force this leg down, pressure through from here. So when this occurs, all we're going to look to do is bring both of the legs together. So I've got my right arm biceps deep. For them to make an effective pummel, their other leg has to be, so that the leg that I'm not reaping, their other leg has to be fairly close. If Stefan were to pummel but be out here, I can just re-pummel and then I can off balance him and I can hit my attack. So if we come back, yeah, he needs to be close enough to my knee pit that I'm no longer able to pummel my bottom leg back in between his legs, which means that the proximity now is going to allow me to create a leg bind, or basically like bear hugging both his knees. And then I've still got that same off balancing option where I can dump him over. At this point, we could re-attack the reap, or we can simply come up and use this to sweep and get on top. So that's, again, it's going to be up to you which one you prefer. Depending on the rule set, you may not have the option of attacking with heel hooks. The false reap is to my understanding, and that's always like, that's the caveat because the IBJJF rules are a little bit labyrinthine. To my understanding, this is legal in the IBJJF, like the initial false sweep position. But once you clear it and touch the foot and start attacking, then it becomes illegal unless you're, adult brown or black belt division. So it may be incumbent on you to use this as a little bit more of a sweeping attack from the leg bind. And it's certainly never wrong to do that. Like, again, people are still very, very good at heel slipping, yada, yada, yada. So we talked about this idea of combining your leg attacks with sweep threats, with passive threats, etc. I think it's a really good idea to have those. So let's come back. So the basic formula, this happens, he pummels, I grip. I try to get as deep a grip as possible. So butterfly grip is great. If all you can do is S grip or gable grip, that's fine. But try to get biceps deep and reinforce the grip on either side of your forearm. Now here, you can see how Stefan's arms are like fairly wide. We still are going to have to bring our partner forward. And I've got more ability to push him to my right than I do to push him to my left. So regardless of where his hands are positioned, I'm going to try to dump him to this hip most of the time. And then again, I'm either kicking free to complete the reap, try to pass the leg across and finish on the heel hook, or now that I've landed here and these legs are still behind my leg, I can simply pendulum up. And because I've got the knee bind, not only am I coming up on top into a sweep position, but I probably can get to a pass, or at least most of the way into a pass from here if I keep the legs together. So in either regard, you've progressed your scenario, your situation in your grappling match or your roll quite dramatically just from getting your partner's knees together. So as I mentioned earlier, when we end up in this position and our partner pummels their leg in and we create this leg bind, in terms of where we can push them, it's a lot more likely that I'll push him to my right. But when we get to this position, what your partner will sometimes or often do is just dump their hip to the mat here like this, because this actually creates more opportunity for him to defend the upcoming pass. Like he could frame me, he could essentially block me. Like I would have to move into a knee cut. Whereas if we land the other way, I'm definitely going to be able to pin his legs together. I shouldn't say definitely, but more likely. So at this point, we're back stepping and coming up into the top 411, and we can either finish by bringing, so he'll be trying to keep his legs together, usually the other way. So I'll be prying them apart by pulling up on the knee, inserting my knee inside, using that as a wedge to pin his bottom leg. Again, usually I'd be on my head here, digging out the heel hook from here, or alternately, we can go into a belly down ankle lock from here. Similar mechanics to what we did from the inside Ashi Z-lock kind of position. I want to make sure that I saw out and back in before I try. I don't just stay tight here and attempt to finish. This is it's doable, but as I go out with my elbow high, making sure I don't lose the heel, and saw back in, I get more pressure at the ankle, and I'm not as much on the Achilles tendon and the calf. So we can just go to the belly down ankle lock, or we can go to the heel hook and finish from here. It is possible to pass. Obviously, I'm landing in a good position, but just my partner's ability to create potential issues because I'm not as, I just don't have as much weight on top of his leg in the initial position. Let me do it the other way. So yeah, if I bring my partner, so he pummels, if I bring my partner to the right here, when I come up, it is much more difficult for him now, even if he's framing me, to stop me from getting on top of his legs and creating some kind of smashing pressure. So he's gonna know that, and he's going to dump his hips to the other side. So he pummels, I grab the leg, he goes like this. Now as I come up, you can see he's landed in a base where, because my arm is trapped between my legs, there's more distance to his hips. So he's going to know that. He's going to be able to frame me out. I can pummel to here and attempt a knee cut, and I may win that battle. But oftentimes at this point, I'm better off backstepping, separating the legs, and getting into my heel hook or my belly down ankle lock finish from there. All right, so one of the eventualities when we get into this position is that our partner will base down on their rear leg. This is a fairly common response as people really keep their weight back. If I can't pitch Stefan's weight forward, me trying to invert through here, this is really tricky. I'm very compressed right now because Stefan's weight is so far away from me. It's actually pretty hard, especially if he's keeping his leg fairly solid. It's really hard for me to complete this motion. So all I'm going to look to do at this point, because I've already got a reverse delariva hook, is I'm going to take my leg out and I'm going to use it as a frame here. So I'm taking my reaping leg out and I'm going to use it as a frame so that I can make his leg fairly light and complete the inversion now into the kiss of the dragon. So I'm not going to go through like back takes or details from here, but what we can do from this position is just kick through into a 50-50, attack knee bars, what have you, so we can still keep this within the realm of leg locks, but all we're doing is going from this to this, and we're set to go. So we'll have, obviously more 50-50 stuff in the 50-50 volume, but so again, I'm playing reverse delariva guard from here. I'm trying to off balance him. I shoot through to my reap, and he bases down. I take the leg out. My left hand can either be on his ankle as it was initially, or it can reach in behind. So I'm either gripping his ankle or I'm underhooking it. If you're quite good at the inversion, honestly, the grip on the ankle here is fine. If you need assistance, the inversion is super helpful. I pummel all the way, or I go to the back, I pummel all the way through, and I re-entangle. So like the ideal circumstance for me here would be this 50-50, backside 50-50, where I can just go into my heel hook from there. It's unlikely that my partner will sit there while I do all of that, but the initial inversion to the kiss of the dragon coming back is pretty reliable, especially if I do a good job of taking that foot out and framing against you. It keeps your hips back, extends your leg as a lever, and then allows me to spin underneath it. So now we're going to talk about the actual process of gaining the entry from the reverse delariva, which is probably the most common, at least against standing passers. This is probably going to be the most common position. So just get your leg back a little bit more, like get into a good base. Yeah. So basically somebody's approaching your guard like they're going to be trying to knee cut or something like this, and you establish a reverse delariva hook. One of the things that's important to understand about both the reverse delariva and the delariva is that the hook itself is not the most critical part, although it's obviously something you want to do. Like if you start pressuring into me with your knee, that's what enables this hook to become like an important control mechanism. If Corey's standing up a little bit taller, which is honestly more the circumstance that we're going to utilize the false sweep, right? Like if Corey was pressuring in a lot and he was super low down, it might be tricky for me, especially for me, to get this this false sweep in. But if he's a little bit more upright, then me trying to insert this hook is not actually a critical part of the control. What's critical is that I'd be using the inside of my knee, like my knee pit, and the inside of my shin here, to off balance him like this. I'm essentially leg pressing and pulling in, leg pressing and pulling in. So if somebody is really pressuring into me and I'm using the reverse delariva this way, I'm unlikely, although again, I'm unlikely. Like, there are people who are very bendy and can insert this foot in here, but for the rest of us, we're going to want to make sure that we are using this knee to push our partner back so that now we can lace this entry into the false reap while our partner's weight is a little bit back. Again, not impossible if he's forward, right? Like I might be framing here. I may still be able to do this. Totally like accessible for some people, maybe even a lot of people. But there are quite a few of us who just will not have the necessarily like external rotation hip dexterity to do this. So for those of us, we're pushing our partner back, and as they come back in, we're meeting them with the false reap and making sure that we get up onto our like elbow a little bit to get our bottom elbow so we can get our top elbow deep to pull our partner forward. And then from here, I can simply push, complete the inversion, spin out into the 411 and finish on the heel hook. Another thing that we will find quite helpful is this initial foot position. So sometimes we'll be in reverse delariva, not out of necessarily our own choosing, where our partner will be starting to pressure forward, and it's too late to use this knee at this point to push him back. There's too much weight forward. So if I'm doing a good job framing, I pummel this foot either onto his shoulder or onto his hip, making sure that I don't insert my foot enough to give him an estima lock. I just use the ball of my foot against his hip. If he's lower down and he's controlling here, I may have to pummel with him, get this onto his shoulder, and then I push him away a little bit. And then I can get up onto my elbow so that I can get my right elbow in deep. Do not try to stay here like this and work from wrist deep. This is like awkward. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's difficult to pull him forward. As soon as I pop up and I get deep here, I can move him so much more with my inversion, with my Kazushi, with all that. So that a part of this is definitely going to be making sure that you go from on your shoulder to up on your elbow to increase the range of motion of your top arm. So if you come back in, so I'm either using this Kazushi or I'm using this leg pressure combined with getting up onto my elbow, shoulder to get here. And then from here on out, everything else is pretty much the same. I'm trying to get to the false reap. He might re-pummel. If he does, then I go to the leg bind and then yada, yada, yada. You know what to do from there. All right, so we're going to talk now about how we're going to enter this position from a half guard / knee cut position. You're not really going to be able to do it from a pure half guard. Like, in other words, if I even get my foot in here, all I've done is essentially like smash my own guard. But when we're in a like quasi half guard position where this knee is starting to come up, exactly, this is where we're going to be able to do this because the space exists now, A, for me to get my arm fairly deep, but also so that when I insert the reap now, there's no possibility because of the framing that he just immediately smashes my guard. So this is a requirement that they be in a, somewhat of a knee cut position. Let's just rewind for a second. So again, this might be them just raising their knee to protect the knee cut. And as long as I keep some frames on my partner's torso so that he cannot close this gap and obviously complete the knee cut, get his underhook, I'm going to be okay. So as the knee is coming up, I'm framing, I'm pummeling this leg in, and now I'm going biceps deep and making sure that I get this grip on my biceps and I get this grip on his thigh, or towards my shoulder, basically anything that prevents any more forward motion with Corey's knee. Get your knee on the ground here. This is, it's not ideal if he gets his knee on the ground, but as long as I'm really like binding it close to my body, I can start to lift him. If, bring your knee out that way a little bit more. Like there, yeah, there. Now, when I go to lift him, nothing happens. So let's just rotate a little bit this way. What's hopefully evident here is the space between my rib cage and Corey's knee is going to determine how far away from me his hip is, and therefore how much of a lever my leg is becoming. So I don't want to get too arcane here, but I'm essentially creating a moment arm where he can start to put his hip down on my leg and smash me. So when we're doing this, if you lift your knee up for me a little bit, when I get the initial bite here, I would be trying to put my biceps underneath of Corey's knee, grab my own biceps and figure for his knee so that his knee is staying attached to my chest and not dropping to the ground. If it does drop to the ground, I want to make sure that I bring it in. I'm grabbing my biceps and I'm pulling his knee close to me so that his center of gravity stays shifted somewhat to my right. It's maybe directly over me, but it's certainly not going to my left. So that now as I bite the ground with the ball of my left foot for base, I'm accessing his hip and I'm able to lift him and start to complete this inversion that takes me, in this case, into the stomp 411 and allows me to finish on the heel hook. So you can see, if we go from this side here, as his knee comes up, I'm blocking him. The margin of error for me is, a little bit more narrow. If I allow this knee out here, I've basically lost, pretty much the likelihood of any leg attack, and my guard is going to be likely compromised. I'd have to bail, frame his armpit, and make sure that I could recover some form of guard. So I make sure that his knee stays glued to me. I'm lifting him, inverting, completing the inversion, getting the bite on the heel, controlling that far leg, and finishing on the heel hook. Okay, this is a kind of a tricky one. I'll get you to go into standing position, Corey. So far we've talked about the false reap in the context of basically a reverse delariva, or something where my leg is over my partner's ankle and my foot shin is in between his legs. So like the basic configuration is something like this, and then I bring my leg across into the false reap. This variation is going to come from a reverse shin on shin, not to be confused with a shin on shin. I think most people that are familiar with shin on shin have learned it as a method of entering the single leg X. That would be if Corey's right foot is forward, I'm meeting it with my left shin, and I'm going biceps deep or wrist deep behind his knee. With the reverse shin on shin, I'm doing this. So I might be playing this in this sort of fashion, right? Right shin against his shin, left hand behind his knee. If we switch to this other side here, left shin grabs the ankle. I'm not putting my foot in between his legs. I'm keeping my foot laced to the outside. My shin is pressuring in. I'm holding the back of his knee. And in this case, I'd be using my right foot as a frame, exactly like I'd be using it in the reverse delariva guard, making sure the ball of my foot is on his hip, and that I'm not sticking my foot into an estima lock. Would be a bad idea. I'm going to look to invert through here. And when I do, it's important, just as with any of the other attacks, that we create a Kazushi. So I'm pushing his leg back so that I can now move myself into the quasi-false reap, where I'm using a reaping leg, but I don't have my other leg to the inside. Now I can pull him into the inversion, and I'm already in the leg attack position. I don't have to clear the legs. My legs can be across in a backside 50-50 or stomp 411 position, or it could be in the same 411 position where I'm using that shin to frame against his hip so he can't pressure back into me, and then I can directly go into my heel hook attack and finish from here. So the advantages of this are obviously that I don't have to clear the leg. So if I'm utilizing this initial attack position and I get to here, I can spin through and my leg's already here, and because I've got the initial grip, I've got the ability to really force my partner's knee into this bent position where I can get into a dig right away, closer to that low rib hip position where I'm going to get more mechanical advantage for the braking pressure that we discussed. So that is the advantage. The disadvantage is if you are not diligent with this control, I am one slight step away from bottom knee ride. In the 50-50 section, we're going to talk about using a similar position to enter directly into backside 50-50. What I would recommend is that if you are not quite familiar with going from here to here to here, which again, we'll go over later on. If you're not familiar with that, the risk of playing reverse shin on shin may not be worth it. Like, you must have an answer for this, whether it's the inversion to backside 50-50 that we're going to cover later on, or it's something else. In other words, if you're really comfortable fighting off the initial stages of a knee ride position, then you're fine, because you will occasionally, while you're here, this is just going to happen once in a while. So you have to have a ready answer for it. If you're not that person, if a knee ride is a position that fucks you up, this is probably the last bit of like false reap related stuff you want to work on, because in the development phase, you're absolutely going to end up there. And we're going to talk about like using proprietary drilling methodology that we use at my academy to increase your speed of development later on. But if you're not in an academy where you have the affordances made for you to make mistakes and still develop, if you make a mistake during a round and you're going to be on bottom of knee ride for the rest of that round, it's going to make it really hard for you to develop this position. So like I said, I would say stay away from this unless you're quite comfortable with that transition between reverse shin on shin and knee ride and how to defend it. If you are, go to town. This is a fantastic movement. And again, for those of us that don't have very flexible hamstrings, this can be a solution that allows you to use the false reap mechanism, whereas you would have otherwise not been able to do so.